Thank you for tuning in once again to Dotwave. My name is John O'Wells, and this is part 2 of a 2-part interview with Olivier Egley, who is Nundale. In this episode, we get into his past and how he came to this country from Switzerland, and we listen to a great deal of his music. Let's get back to it. So we're going to get into some of your newer music. I definitely want to hear that and let our listeners hear that. But you've got a track from 2015 called Adricile. Do you want to set that up for us?
Sure, absolutely. Adricile was actually done on a vacation retreat in the Swiss Alps. I traveled up there for my birthday in 2015. I brought a toothbrush, like a pair of jeans, couple t-shirts, and a small rig with like 6 or 7 modules, and I was just like staring out the window, and I don't know. And then one day suddenly it started snowing. We got completely snowed in, and on the other end, this track appeared. And I don't know what it is, but I find like it has this haunting quality somehow. It's a very poor recording. What I love about it, it's like noisy as hell, and it sounds like shit. But kind of, I
don't want to play this at all.
it lends itself to it. It's lo-fi, and it's like in any kind of the word.
Okay, here's Adricile from Nundale. So I know you're from Switzerland. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and growing up there and what it took to move you here and how that choice happened?
Well, I was born in Zurich, Switzerland, and I stayed there like most of my life, except for like went for college. I went to Vancouver for a couple of years. Have always been like fond of the West Coast. It's when I discovered Los Angeles, like in the late '90s, and then eventually I met my wife over like online on MySpace, if you remember that, like around 2005, I think. She hit me up.
A MySpace romance. That's nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was really like extraordinary in that it was not a thing back then in 2004, 2005, that we didn't have all these platforms yet, especially not in Europe. And MySpace was really more like a music thing. I just had my musical interests up there and a few like very obscure, weird, dark techno tracks. But what attracted her to hit me up was that I declared openly my love for Nine Inch Nails and anything Trent Reznor. She was the same way, so we kind of shared that interest, and that's how we like hit it off. Well, fast forward, after like some ups and downs, in 2012 I spent a summer in Los Angeles, went to like do some continued education stuff, and stayed with her, and then less than a year later we got married and she moved with me to Switzerland. And
that's nice.
Yeah, then a couple of years later it was my turn to move back to her place of origin, which is Los Angeles. And since she has Mexican background, family is very important, so she wanted to be around her family, and I wanted to move out of Switzerland anyway because it's very, very easy to hit your head on like the ceiling in Switzerland. It's so small. So I needed a bigger playground for my new ambitions after like all the advertising shit that I had been gone through. And well, yeah, the rest is kind of like, yeah, we're here.
Do you have more tracks from the past that we could hear?
Yeah, I have hard drives full of like old shit. But there's one that kind of like sticks out because it became kind of like popular in certain circles for like whatever reason. It's called The Deep End. It's from 2016. It's when I actually started playing live modular shows.
I see.
And it's just like a cute track. I think it has this cute arpeggio line. It's kind of like, memorable. And I don't know, I guess it's kind of like emblematic for that time.
Well, all right, here's The Deep End. And so now you've moved out of Los Angeles and you're setting up a pretty interesting situation in Lake Arrowhead. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we decided a couple of months ago that we would move out of the city. It's just kind of like we're not really city folks, and we had that going for like a year, and it's just like not very conducive to like neither our business nor like the creative ambitions. So we found this amazing place in Lake Arrowhead. It's a huge house that we're currently transforming to become kind of like a retreat for like creative collaboration. We call it the Y House, right? A little like based on our company, the Y Story. So we kind of want to make this a home for people who want to like share and contribute in a collaborative setting. And in terms of music, I'm building up a studio here, and I have different rooms that allow for like musical collaboration or just like to work on something, and then like central parts where you can come together. And the idea is to have like in-resident guests, musicians that come in, that we can jam out and just press record and then just release whatever we feel like, or like work on whatever we want. And it's really like the idea of pulling people out of their usual comfort zone into a new, into a new surrounding. Like I'm surrounded by trees, by pines, and I have nothing but like green around me. And it's very quiet. And it's something that has helped me to like, really focus on what's going on inside of me in terms of like, hey, wait a minute, what is it really that I want to do? Because being in Los Angeles, I was exposed to the noise all the time. I went to parties and I went to like bars and heard new records and whatever. And the problem is that I bring all of that home, and then I sit in the studio and the phone rings, or someone rings at the door, or there's like a helicopter
Right.
flying above you, or there are like police cars chasing like someone outside. And there's just no way for me to really retire to like a blank slate place kind of location. So this is kind of like what I want to do. And yeah, and we hope that we get to start this in a couple of months. Like we're still like in the construction phase and cleaning things out and all that, but it's really what I'm about. I just want to collaborate with amazing people and just push the envelope of like, hey, like creative self, production, or whatever you want to call it. I want to give the opportunity to other people, and I really am curious to see like how far I can contribute also to people coming up here.
Why don't you set up another one of your tracks for us?
I would choose, 2017 was fairly productive, but everything like led to 2018, where I got signed with a new label, and then released an EP called Master Reset, which I think was kind of like, it was fairly successful in the glitch hop charts, whatever glitch hop is. I don't know if it's glitch hop, but it was very successful in there. And there was this one track that I feel like represents the spirit of the album, and like kind of like how I was going about my music better than anything else. It's called Final Entropy.
in buildings or patterns on glass and patterns on flags. Patterns everywhere.
Something I really want to talk to you about that we've talked about in the past is artistic restraint, like using less to make more, because both of us are involved in modular synths and the gear acquisition syndrome is serious. And
Yep.
how do you...
It's epidemic.
Yeah. So when you're building a set or for a show or just when you're working at home, how does artistic restraint play into your process? Or are you really or are you really letting it rip with everything you've got and then paring it down for a live performance? Or like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because it's something that without wanting it, I obsess over it. The fact that I have too many choices at a time makes me very unproductive because there are like probably around 50 sources for a kick drum or a snare drum in my immediate surrounding in the studio. So I make the mistake oftentimes to like add more and more and more in the finding of like something that I could use to build something upon. But I always end up chiseling away to the bare minimum. So in like as a response to your question, artistic restraint, I think it's great to be limited and to be aware of limitations. But within that limitation, you ideally still have options, because I can look at my rack and I have around like 1200 HP of modules right now. So it means that without any redundancy, I have a lot of VCOs that can cover like any given sound. But I can limit myself to 5 or 6 modules, but I have the freedom to pick which modules I will use for that limitation, right? So that's kind of like how I start. I will really try to build simple patches, basic patches, and then realize if I need a certain something, to spice it up, a little bit of condiment, I will use additional tools for that. But I will stay with a very simple basic patch, but I will take a lot of time figuring out what basic ingredients I will choose for it. So I will not overload with like 20 ingredients. I will only pick 5 or 6, but I'm picky about which ones I'm gonna choose.
Right.
Because I always have like the same case that I take with me when I do live, and it's reasonably big. It's 12U, so it's like 416 HP. But as we know, some of the modules are rather like big. They require a lot of real estate.
Right.
So I have my main modules. They're like my bread and butter, and then I kind of build around that with keeping in mind the playability and the level of experimentation I want to like get into it. And that's something new for me because I used to be a very classical guy in the sense of like, want to have full control over like song structures and like the chorus and then going back to the main theme and that kind of thing. And that always upset me about modular. It was very hard to retain song structures because it obviously is a tool for experimentation. So now I have embraced, I think over the past few months, I have embraced the new setup that really like lets me build upon something that I know what it is, but then it can go completely like off the beaten path and become something completely new. And it can suck. And sometimes it becomes like much more than I expected. But that's kind of part of it.
Yeah, well, improvising in modular is like, live. I mean, there's a freedom to it, but
but you need to be
totally
comfortable.
Scary.
You
it's
need
totally
to be
scary too.
Yeah, Because back in the days, I mean, let's be honest, we all went through, or most of us went through the Ableton controller phase. And it is really just like driving in third gear, buckled up with the handbrake on, because there's no real risk. Oh, of course, your computer can like crap off, or like your sound card just gives up the ghost or whatever. But that's not really like the kind of accidents that modular invites you to do. It's really just like, hey, we could go off beat and we could miss a beat here, or you could totally like hit a combination of controllers in a certain way, and then everything takes off in a completely different direction, and you need to be okay with it.
How do you balance a generative set versus a performance set, or maybe combining them? Because generative modules are so powerful, but you also can't perform on them very well. So
Yes.
how do you do that?
I usually when I plan a setup, I start with the logic first, or you could call it the workflow. So like I need to know exactly what is going to influence what. So I kind of like draw it out, and I'm like, okay, I have my gates and my triggers. Those are the signals I base everything around, because I'm like percussion first kind of person. So, you know, what's going to trigger envelopes, what's going to trigger samples, what's going to trigger, you know, like oscillators that have built-in VCAs, and kind of follow that kind of logic. And within that, I'm like, okay, and where do I want a source of uncertainty or probability that I can control to a certain extent? And where do I need a solid base I can always return to, where I know, hey, if I go back to this, that's exactly what I get. Okay, that's like the basic logic that I kind of try to design. And there are modules that facilitate that a great deal, like Noise Engineering's, I think it's called Confondo Funkitus or something. It's a crossfader kind of. So, you know, you can always have 4 sources of reliable triggers or gates, and 4 sources of like completely haywire and like, you know, like randomness, and you can kind of interpolate between, or you can choose A or B. Okay, so these kind of modules that add some kind of like a level of control and choice between randomness, chance, and total construction intent, those are very helpful in laying out a basic a logic of like, okay, I want a little bit of like, you know, unweighted intent, and I want heavy intent, and I can switch between them. Switches are great. I love switches. Or I love like, you know, those coin toss modules that allow to like pass an A or a B signal according to like a probability that's between them. Those kind of things, to me, they're like not just bridges or like, you know, like polishing modules they use at the end to kind of make it more interesting. To me, they live at the very heart of the basic logic of the patch.
Absolutely.
And you
Something
need
like
to,
mutable instruments, marbles.
yeah, marbles, and they had this much more basic module back in the days. It's really small, and I think it has like 1 knob, 2 inputs, 1 output, and it's basically just coin tossing between A and B. And if you have 4 or 5 of those, I mean, you can chain them or you can just use them in parallel, and it's amazing. It just opens up new levels of like experimentation, but it allows you to go back to song structure, or, you know, to like a planned out structure. And that's what I need. I will never be comfortable completely just like, you know, patching up in front of an audience, or just like seeing where it takes me. I would never rely on that as like the basic idea. For me, it would be 20% that I would add to it to experiment, but I would want to be able to go back to what I created, and that maybe people already know, or that I know, and that I feel like, yes, that is my meat and potato.
So you've provided me a couple tracks from 2019. Thank you. And I want to play one of my favorite sections from an 18-minute mix called Data Loss. Here's Nundale. Man, like so many of my guests, you're somebody who I could just talk to for hours. Thanks so much for doing this.
Well, thank you for having me.
Tell us what's next for you and where we can find you and see you.
Well, as I mentioned, my retreat project in Lake Arrowhead is taking up a lot of my time. That and just the usual business. Also, I'm gonna be playing in Europe in the next couple of weeks, like in Vienna and in Munich, possibly in Berlin. The dates are still kind of like floating around. But other than that, I will go back to the studio and finish an album that's long overdue, and we'll see what the new year will bring. I'm very excited because I feel like with the new studio and the kind of new like ideas I have, I'll be able to like take it up a notch.
I want to close this episode out with another track from Nundale from 2019. This is called Fenix. I'm your host, John O'Wells, and thank you once again for listening to Dotwave.